ASEAN members and their Indo-Pacific partners, including South Korea and the US, have called for efforts to ensure the complete denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. We have more on Press Perspective today. Welcome to Press Perspective for this Monday, July 14th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. First Vice Foreign Minister Park Yoon-joo was in Malaysia to attend a number of ASEAN-related gatherings, including the ASEAN Regional Forum, as well as a trilateral interaction with top diplomats of the US and Japan on the margins of the regional multilateral meetings. Now, for more on this, I have freelance journalist Raphael Rashid from the UK here in the studio with us. Raphael, I hope you had a great weekend.
Thank you. Good to be back.
I also have Steven Borowiec with Japanese weekly news magazine Nikkei Asia here in the studio with us. Steven, welcome back.
Nice to see you all.
Right, Raphael, we will start with you. So let's begin with the statement against North Korea's nuclear weapons program shared at this year's ASEAN Regional Forum and its significance, of course.
Yeah, I think the language shift at this year's ASEAN Regional Forum, the ARF, is quite telling. We had last year's statement, they called for the complete, verifiable and irreversible denuclearization, which is known as CVID. But this year's version was just simply complete denuclearization, which is, I suppose, a notable softening in tone. This change could be reflecting South Korea's evolving diplomatic approach under President Lee Jae-myung, who has advocated for easing tensions with North Korea, pursuing dialogue with Pyongyang, and maybe trying to take a bit more of a less confrontational stance compared to maybe a previous administration. And I think this statement also draws attention precisely because it has to reconcile with the different positions among participating countries. You've got the US, China, Russia, of course, North Korea, all theoretically at the table, although, of course, this year North Korea was notably absent. But as I mentioned, this softening of the tone comes as South Korea is trying to maybe restart inter-Korean engagement after years of stalled nuclear talks. I guess the fact that 27 countries, including major powers that have vastly different approaches and opinions on North Korea, could agree on any statement, I guess, is noteworthy in itself. Of course, perhaps other forces might have been at play, but overall, I think the move away from asking for the CVID language suggests that maybe there's recognition that previous approaches simply did not yield any results. So whether it's a softening of tone that opens space for dialogue, we'll have to see.
Right, we will. And North Korea's denuclearization, Stephen, was also addressed during a trilateral ministerial meeting among South Korea, the US and Japan on the margins of the ASEAN-related gatherings. Could you tell us a bit about that particular exchange and, of course, its relevance?
Well, we don't know exactly the details of the meeting because they were not made public, but we can infer a few things, and probably it makes sense just to flag that this was the first kind of meeting of its nature under the Lee Jae-myung administration. So we have to assume that the three parties are trying to feel out just how things will work under this new administration. Lee has made quite positive signals when it comes to like how he might approach relations with both the US and Japan bilaterally and on the trilateral level. So we also should note that South Korea was not represented by the full-fledged foreign minister. This was by the first vice foreign minister, Park Yoon-joo. So there would be some limitations on what they could agree to, or just how formally they could engage, just because of the differences in rank. But as we all know, these are three countries that have quite a few shared interests in the region. These are all democracies. These are South Korea and Japan are both treaty allies with the US and have these very long and very comprehensive defense partnerships. So we can expect that they talked a lot about how they might coordinate to stave off the threat from North Korea, and that could be when it comes to sharing missile defense information, or taking part in trilateral drills, or facing off the threats of that we see in cyberspace, when it comes to thefts of cryptocurrency and hacking and all kinds of other things. So I expect that in the near future we'll hear more kind of concrete details for how the three sides intend to move forward.
Right. Raphael, as you mentioned earlier, for the first time in 25 years, North Korea, it skipped this year's ASEAN Regional Forum in Malaysia. Could you give us some context behind its absence this year?
Yeah, I think it's historically unprecedented, as you've just mentioned, and it seems to stem from its severed diplomatic relationship with Malaysia, the host country. And the two nations cut ties in March 2021 after Malaysia's highest court approved the extradition of a North Korean businessman back to the United States, and that was basically for laundering charges. And that was essentially the final straw in these DPRK-Malaysia relationships that had been deteriorating since 2017, when, of course, if we all remember, there was the assassination of Kim Jong-nam, Kim Jong-un's estranged half-brother at Kuala Lumpur International Airport. And Malaysia suspected North Korea's involvement and subsequently suspended the DPRK diplomatic relationship or the mission at that time. But I think what makes this significant is that ASEAN traditionally won't invite countries that have severed diplomatic ties with any of their member states, even though they might be members of the forum. So basically, North Korea is locked out. But what is important or significant when it comes to North Korea's point of view is that this is one of the very few avenues where North Korea can portray itself on the world stage. For 25 years, the ARF has served as its primary window for international diplomacy and face-to-face meetings with between North Korean officials and maybe other counterparts, even maybe South Korean or from the US or Japan. So I think this is kind of a self-imposed isolation by North Korea, but also I think we have to remember the context in which this is happening. This is also happening when North Korea is trying to become closer and closer with Russia rather than engaging in multilateral diplomacy. So it's, I guess, a significant shift where Pyongyang's very few avenues for diplomacy or lifelines is being shut out.
Right. And staying with that, North Korea's absence from the Security Forum this year was noted by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, and he traveled to North Korea right after the Security Forum. If I were to ask you, Steven, to look into or to read the optics of this visit, what would you choose to highlight?
First, I would highlight the location, and I would say that he did not travel to the capital, Pyongyang, but he traveled to this city called Wonsan, which is on the coast, and has recently been highlighted by North Korean state media and by foreign media subsequently as a new kind of tourist destination. There's this quite comprehensive development on the coast featuring hotels and various recreational facilities, and the idea is that this is a place that's going to be attractive to outside visitors. Then there's a few kind of complications to that because it's not exactly clear just like to what extent North Korea is going to open to foreign tourists, and what nationalities of visitors they might open to, and what restrictions those visitors might be under if they were to travel to the country. The Russian foreign minister had made some comments specifically about how he thought that Russian tourists would increasingly look to visit Wonsan. Of course, that remains to be seen. I mean, I'm not entirely sure like what the real attraction might be. Foreign visitors have customarily been attracted to North Korea because of the the difficulty of visiting it in and of itself is attractive to some people. This is one of the world's most isolated and kind of secretive places. Would people from Russia or anywhere else want to go to North Korea just to kick back and have a good time and to swim and eat and do all the things that you normally do on vacation? Maybe, but we don't really know yet. Just logistically, the Russian Lavrov said that he would do what he could to facilitate connections, make it easier for people to travel back and forth with direct flights to Russian cities and all the rest. And then from then on, he went on to talk about the main kind of area of cooperation between Russia and North Korea, which is military, and North Korea's support for Russia's ongoing military operation in Ukraine. And I thought the sentence, the wording that Lavrov chose, where he said this, they had formed a solid foundation for an invincible combat brotherhood. I mean, that's maybe he was hanging out with his KCNA counterparts when he came up with that wording, because it's like right up their alley. But if you take his word for it, and there's no reason why we shouldn't, both of these sides have found, I think, a quite strong coincidence in their interests and found that they have a lot to gain from supporting each other. And the more that this goes on, the more it seems that North Korea is really orienting its foreign relations towards Russia and China. And it does not appear to be eager to engage with some of the other countries, such as those in ASEAN and here in South Korea.
Right. And staying with Lavrov's remarks made in Wonsan while meeting with his North Korean counterpart, that he also warned against a security partnership targeting North Korea by South Korea, the US, and Japan. What exactly did he say, Raphael, and what's your take on his remarks or his tough rhetoric thus far?
Yeah, after meeting Kim Jong-un, he accused the US, South Korea and Japan of military buildups around North Korea, issued a direct caution, of course, saying we warn against exploiting these ties to build alliances directed against anyone, including North Korea and, of course, Russia. Again, I think we should look at the timing and the location of this statement. It was delivered on North Korean soil and came just after the ARF, where the three allies, as Steven mentioned, reaffirmed their commitment to trilateral cooperation. So I think it's essentially Moscow inserting itself as North Korea's kind of diplomatic defender on the international stage, especially when North Korea doesn't have many friends at the moment. Lavrov went further, offering explicit support for North Korea's nuclear program, saying Russia understands the reasons why it is pursuing nuclear development and respects North Korea's aspirations. So essentially, we have Russia backing Pyongyang's nuclear ambitions. And I think in practical terms, these remarks I guess they were unlikely to derail the talks between the three powers, the trilateral framework. The three countries just last week conducted joint air drills involving US bomber near the Korean Peninsula, and also I think their relationships have only deepened over the past few years in response to North Korea's military advancements and nuclear ambitions. But I guess Lavrov's comments do signal, I think, that Russia is positioning itself as a kind of counterweight to trilateral pressure on North Korea, basically Moscow now providing the diplomatic cover and military support to Pyongyang.
Right. And in light of this deepening relationship between Pyongyang and Moscow, Stephen, quite a number of scholars in neighboring Japan have been echoing a bit of what we've been talking about here in our sessions in the past, how a Trump-Kim summit is not likely in the near future. What exactly are Japanese pundits saying?
I think I would highlight two things that two threads of analysis that have emerged in Japan and elsewhere. The first one just being that Kim was left with a pretty bitter taste in his mouth after the Hanoi summit. He walked away without a deal. He walked, I think there were certain kind of formative or procedural things that rubbed him the wrong way. He felt as though perhaps maybe he lost face as Trump kind of spurned him and walked away from the table. And one thing that we don't really know about, or at least I don't, maybe there are, people in intelligence services who know this, but just to what extent does he have to answer to anybody? When he gets back to Pyongyang, is there a body of very senior or very powerful North Korean officials who can reprimand him or who can dress him down for what they see as mistakes in his statecraft, or is he so beyond reproach that this was just a matter of him having a kind of consequential personal animus with Trump, that he just he feels like he maybe has a dislike of him now, or he just has bad memories of Hanoi and he's just not all that keen to re-engage. The other thread that I would highlight is just a more cost-benefit analysis-based one. Is just North Korea may just be satisfied with their relationship with Russia. They may just feel like this is a fruitful path of engagement that like they're as Raphael just laid out. It's not just a matter of like material gains in terms of selling them ammunition or perhaps earning foreign currency from having having North Korean laborers in Russia or enterprises of that nature, but Russia is kind of providing, more kind of symbolic support. Russia is attending this forum in ASEAN and then coming back and on North Korea's behalf saying like, well, we looked out for your interests even though you weren't there, and we have this, bulletproof brotherhood. So I think, as a lot of analysts have pointed out, by all appearances, as things currently stand, North Korea just doesn't seem all that interested in pursuing relationships with either the U.S. or South Korea, because I think they just feel like they don't want to give up their nuclear weapons. That's a non-starter for them. They've invested too much in that, and I think that it provides them with too much of a sense of security that for them to want to give it up. And so sanctions relief is probably not going to be forthcoming. Extravagant aid or anything like that is probably not going to be forthcoming. So I think they just have identified where the fruitful partnerships are, and as a number of analysts have pointed out, they just are giving no indication that they are placing a lot of stock in ties with either the U.S. or Korea. And for that reason, we think a Trump-led summit would be pretty unlikely.
Right then. So despite the pessimism of the prospects of a US-North Korea summit, the top diplomat of the US and China, though, sat down on the sidelines of the ASEAN Regional Forum. What topped their talks, Raphael, and what were some of your takeaways?
Yeah, I think, so we have this Rubio-Wang meeting in Kuala Lumpur, and I suppose it revealed some kind of contradictions. On the one hand, you have fierce debate, kind of public disagreements, and on the other hand, you have so-called constructive private diplomacy talks. This was, of course, the first time that there were face-to-face encounter between Wang and Rubio since he took office. Both sides described it as very constructive and positive. Of course, trade tensions were dominated the agenda, dominated the kind of public rhetoric. Wang was fierce in his criticism and told ASEAN counterparts that the US tariffs represented typical unilateral bullying behavior and had undermined the free trade system. So clearly, I think China is positioning itself as a defender of multilateral trade while kind of painting Washington as a disruptor. Meanwhile, Rubio brought up China's involvement when it comes to Russia's war in Ukraine, saying that Beijing had been willing to help them as much as they can without getting caught. On the flip side, Rubio did tell reporters after that there were areas of potential collaboration or cooperation, building better communication between the two sides, and of course saying that trust was essential. He suggested that the odds are high for a Trump-Xi meeting this year, saying that both sides want to see it happen. So I think this suggests that kind of beneath the public posturing that we're seeing and these tensions, there's also serious diplomatic involvement and engagement occurring, perhaps backstage. And the prospect of a Trump-Xi summit would, of course, be a major development for the two countries, potentially opening a pathway or maybe diminishing tensions in this kind of trade war that is spiraling out of control. But I think maybe when we look at this from a broad perspective, these, I guess, competing narratives seem to be forcing ASEAN countries to kind of choose sides between fostering multilateral cooperation or just choosing sides essentially. So we saw quite a lot of dynamics this time around.
Right. And come tomorrow, Steven, that's Tuesday, China hosts the foreign ministerial meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Could you tell us a bit about this particular meeting?
Well, we don't know the agenda yet because it hasn't been made public, but this will take place in the Chinese city of Tianjin. And if you look at what this organization typically does and what it seems like its outward orientation is, to just speculate, I think what they would probably be doing is kind of parsing the role that diplomats and that other policymakers can play in facilitating trade and facilitating economic development. In China, you have this very collaborative relationship between what is ostensibly the private sector businesses and the state government. They tend to work together in finding export markets, in having the right regulations to allow businesses to prosper. So I think what will probably be, in sort of rough terms, what will be on the agenda here will be foreign ministers from different countries talking about how they can go home and inform their own business communities, their own fellow policy people as to how they can tackle the way that trade and the way that the geopolitical winds are changing in a way that's beneficial for them, both on a government level and on a commercial level.
Right, and speaking about trade, Raphael, generally speaking, how is Mr. Trump's tariff policy affecting international diplomacy, do you think?
I think this is kind of his kind of tariff threats, I think, are representing a kind of fundamental shift from, say, an economic policy tool to a diplomatic weapon, and I think it's having corrosive effect on kind of international cooperation. Just the other day, when it came to the BRICS nations, he mentioned that anybody in the BRICS is going to get a 10% charge pretty soon, essentially weaponizing kind of trade against a bloc. That includes major US partners like India or Brazil. I think these kind of rhetorics or behavior can be quite disruptive, especially when they're so sweeping and so vague and general. And I think just these days, countries, I suppose it's news around the world on a daily basis, but countries are being forced to choose between regional economic integration or a cooperation in these blocks, whether it's ASEAN or the BRICS or anywhere else, and access to US markets. And I think it's creating a kind of global system where participating in, especially these non-Western forums, becomes a bit of a liability rather than an economic opportunity.
Right, and against this backdrop, Steven, the Lee Jae-myung administration has been at the top office for roughly about 6 weeks now. It may be too early to ask, but based on its diplomatic activities thus far, how is the foreign media evaluating the new administration's progress thus far?
Well, as you said, it is pretty early, but I think that anybody who's observing in either foreign media or any other kind of platform would just say that the Lee administration has done a lot of just kind of basically sensible things so far. I think it was wise of Lee to make his kind of international diplomatic debut as quickly as he could by attending the G7 in Canada. And beyond that, he's made efforts to reach out to, I think, every important bilateral partner. He's spoken with Trump, he's spoken with Ishiba in Japan, he's spoken with Xi Jinping in China, he's reached out to ASEAN. So we don't have the kind of benefit of hindsight just yet. We don't know just exactly how his foreign policy will play out, but I think you could say that he's playing it safe and he's just listening to his advisors, and he's just over and over again he said that he is pursuing Korea's national interests, that this is not going to be what, as with his predecessor, a values-based diplomacy, that he's going to look out for the well-being of Korean citizens and how whatever he can to improve their material well-being, their security, and he seems to be doing just that so far.
Right, by basing his foreign diplomacy on pragmatic issues then?
Yes.
All right, that's all the time I'm afraid that we have. Steven, as always, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts today.
Thank you.
And Raphael, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, that ends Press Perspective for today. Thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow.